1. Background. This was during an unpaid internship at a construction company. I was an electrical engineer on a site for a new mail opening in a high-end neighborhood. The company was responsible for the electrical and mechanical works of the entire mall, and a few stores owned by the mall itself. This was close to the project's finish, and most engineers have been moved off to other projects, so I was treated as a fully certified electrical engineer due to a shortage of engineers, and managed the entire ground floor, 2 stores, and a team of 40 or so technicians. I only reported to my site manager and did not interact with any other firm or contractor. After the first 2 months, I had my company's technician and site manager's trust. I was even issued a checkbook, unsure if that's the English translation. It's a billing form. Site engineers carry it around to issue repair, field change, and other on-the-spot invoices because other contractors were on the site and they used to damage our fixtures, so we made them pay on the spot. Now on to the main story. Store's architect sends me a text at 10 a.m. Baron's site manager gave me your number. Moore's project manager and I will be doing rounds on the ground floor in stores. Make sure the technicians have made progress. I text back, sure, let me know when you're here and I will give you the tour. We continue working according to my site manager's guidelines and my maps, and to be honest, we were ahead of the schedule. Around 3 p.m., I hear the voice bellowing behind me. Are you Baron? What are you doing to my mall? I turn back confused and see a man wearing a black suit with a jacket walking toward me quickly, and the architect running behind as fast as she could. Building it? Snarky, I know. But at the time I was really confused, and that is what came out of me. No, you are most definitely not. How can you complete anything properly if your incompetent staff cannot even clean after yourselves? Do you need me to teach you how to wipe after yourselves too? The architect arrives out of breath. Yes, it is unacceptable. Just a minute. A lot of running. Okay, yes, it's unacceptable. The amount of dust and residue on the shelves is not acceptable. She had an I'm sorry on her face, but clearly did not want me to fight. Come with me to the store and bring your idiot technicians with you. I call 10 of my guys that were around me and we walk together. The mall's project manager and architect start talking in English, thinking I did not understand English. Oops. Thankfully, my technicians did not. They are foreigners who only speak the native language, and I can only imagine what their reaction would have been. The project manager says in English, "You'll need to run this ship more smoothly, architect. You'll need to understand this is a master and slave relationship. Make them fear you and understand you are in charge." Architect turns red and pale, knowing I understand English. She tries to warn him, but we arrive at the shop and he cuts her off. He takes the most obnoxious walk into the store and puts his finger on the shelf and passes it along. Turns it towards my staff and I, all smug and like showing us a line of dust caused by metalwork, ceiling wiring, and drilling. My technician started sighing and mumbling. Is he for real? He knows we're going to cut more, right? Watch closely, he says again in English. Listen, Baron, you and your guys will clean after each cut. And each thing you do in these 2 stores. I want to be able to see my reflection off of those shelves. I ought to charge you $20 just for cleaning that shelf. Something in me cracked, and I pulled out my checkbook, wrote down cleaning a single shelf for $20, signed it, and had him sign it. Took a 20 out of my pocket and gave it to him, making the entire transaction on the spot right there. He and the architect walked off snickering. My technicians looked pissed. You all have smartphones, right? They say yes. Document everything you clean and send it to me. Later that week I sent an invoice for 58 shelves, between the 2 stores, front and back rooms, cleaned twice a day at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. at $20 a pop. It totaled $2,320. Every bill we issue is overseen by the site manager who called me in.
Baron, why are we charging them all a cleaning bill?
I explained the story, showed him the invoice I paid out, and the folder on the company server showing my tax members cleaning. The site manager was furious. First, he hated the guy. Second, he was working with those staff members for over 5 years now, and did not like them being characterized as slaves. He approved it and sent it. The very next day, the mall's project manager, architect, and what looked like an executive walked in demanding to see the site manager and called in our company's owner. I was not in on the meeting, but was outside. After lots of yelling, the trio furiously walked out. I was later told we no longer had to clean after ourselves until the entire work is finished, and I received exactly $2,320 as a bonus for my unpaid internship. All of the technicians received a nice bonus pay for that week's work too. Their pay is weekly. 2. Let's call my asshole boss Eugene, since his stinginess reminds me of Eugene Krabs from SpongeBob SquarePants. Except Krabs is nowhere near as malicious. In order to display the full satisfaction of this revenge, I will have to describe a few, but not limited to, things Eugene did that entitles him to being a complete jackass. For the context, Eugene owns a small company that provides artistic services of some sort, and never hired full-timers, which I later learned that it was due to his stinginess. Initially, when I saw the open part-time position, I thought it was ideal for me as I had external commitments and needed some sort of income. The job offers about $550 USD per month. I don't live in the US, this is a rough conversion, but only required me to clock in about 90 hours a month. It wasn't a very good offer, but good enough for me as I considered myself to be inexperienced in the field. Note that Eugene had seen my portfolio and knew my ability level before hiring me. The first couple of months was fine. I worked the hours I was supposed to and got paid accordingly. Occasionally extending my shift at my own time due to the nature of the work, but I didn't mind. I guess Eugene saw this as an advantage he could exploit later on during my employment. It is also important to note that Eugene would often ask about my well-being. How did I spend my weekends, etc. At this point in time, it all seemed like courtesy talk, so I didn't pay much attention to it. He would ask about my previous employment and my reason for leaving, which I answered honestly, that their work system was unsuitable for me. This will be important later. Eugene gradually began to grow more impatient towards me, often blaming me for not being able to match up to his ability. Remember when I was inexperienced, thus the pay rate? Eugene had over a decade of experience in this expertise, and he expected me to be at his level when I was only 3 months in. The stress was intense, and I began working longer hours just to keep up, and produce the best quality I could. I was under the belief that if I worked hard enough, my effort will speak. Even though this was only a part-time position, I overcommitted my time there, and took pride in my work. My external commitments were barely scraping by. I was exhausted, but thought I was doing a good job until Eugene spoke to me one day. Eugene pulled me into his office and lectured me on my work etiquette. Saying that I wasn't putting enough effort, he was considering letting me go. At this point, I was beyond confused. Did he really not see the effort I put in? Was I delusional in thinking that I was actually doing well and my work had been improving? I tried speaking up, but he quickly diverted the topic, telling me he knew the reason why my previous employer hated me. It was because I was lazy and uncommitted. To say I was in disbelief was an understatement. Not only did I believe I did my best with every task handed to me, Eugene had registered my flaws during casual conversations and twisted my words to his advantage. I had no idea how to react and simply asked him what he expected of me. He instantly replied that he would like me to double my hours working for him at this same monthly pay rate. His reasons? It's my fault that I'm not experienced enough to produce quality work. Thus, it should be under my own responsibility and time to make up for it. My external commitments didn't matter, he said, as this job was my only source of income and he should be kept as priority. It finally dawned on me that Eugene was a narcissistic sociopath who had only held conversations so that he could learn a person's weaknesses for his manipulation. Now, as I said earlier, Eugene was not only narcissistic but also stingy AF. Eugene is obsessed with maximizing his profits. Any business owner would love that, I agree, but Eugene is down to every cent in immoral and even possibly illegal ways. He would sell a service to a client and upon receiving the deposit, deliver something else. He was smart enough to keep his contracts vague for both clients and employees, so that nobody could take legal action against him. More than often, his clients would be at their wits' end, as it would be too late and expensive to engage another vendor by the time they realized they had been scammed. Eugene would then demand another set of payment to deliver what he had originally promised, overcharging the client an average of 100 to 200% more than what was agreed. Eventually realizing that they'd been played, most people would be too exhausted to pursue further action and prayed for the project to be over so they didn't have to deal with his antics anymore. This inaction probably fed Eugene's ego that he could get away playing dirty every time. There are many more things that I would like to rant about Eugene, but this is a revenge story, so let's get to the good stuff soon. In my country, employers are required to pay a certain amount of tax for every local employee they hire. While it is not exactly tax, it is obligated by law, and negligence will result in a hefty fine and possibly jail time. These taxes are technically contributions for the employee's retirement funds, which is payable by every employer. Employer can deduct a certain percentage of the contributions from the employee's wages. This law has its own complications since there are a certain group of people exempt from it, such as students or interns. Now, Eugene is the classic example of narcissist who thinks that he is smarter than everyone else. He felt that he was smart enough to evade the law by drafting a contract with vague details to protect himself, and was deluded enough to believe that everyone would believe him as long as he sounded convincing. In other words, he thought of people as sacks of potatoes with no opinion of their own. If anyone was to have a perspective, it had to be his way or the wrong way. I stayed in Eugene's company for about 4 months before I felt too mentally overwhelmed. On the day that I left, I called in to check in my contribution account, and just as I expected, Eugene hadn't paid a single cent over the past 4 months. The officer on the other end of the line asked if I would like to report this as a case. Guess my answer. A week later, I received an update from the contribution board saying that Eugene had disputed my case, claiming that I was only an intern and thus exempted from the law. This jerk was playing dirty as a last attempt to steal from me. As I had mentioned, Eugene thought of himself as a smart man, and probably felt that the officer would rule the case in his favor since he had world-class convincing skills, and his vague contract would have protected him either way. Fine, Eugene. So you think you can get away just like any other time. You must have gotten pretty confident by now. Well, not this time, Eugene. I wrote a 2 pages long email to the contribution board officer, with every reason and evidence I can find on how I am not an intern like Eugene claimed. Knowing his antics, I went the extra mile to research all the exempted groups, and wrote every possible reason on how I am not in the category. Excessive? Yes. Worth it? Hell yes. I didn't hear from the officer for 2 weeks, and when I finally did, he informed me that Eugene had agreed to pay my contributions. Remember when I said employers are permitted to deduct a certain percentage from employees' wages? Due to his negligence, Eugene could no longer do that, and had to pay the full amount, on top of the fines that incurred along with it. If he had dutifully abided by the law, it would have only cost him 1/3 of what he had to pay. So that's a bit of asshole tax for you, Eugene. Now that I've gotten back what I was owed, I've decided to move on, but the story did not end there. An ex-colleague of mine, NJ, who was still working for Eugene, told me that during the 2 weeks I didn't hear from the officer, Eugene was busy fighting for his stand by giving every reason that I am an exempted individual. The officer, having seen my email, soon got tired of his nonsense and gave him a deadline to pay up or he'll be brought to court. NJ said he had never seen Eugene so defeated before. To top it off, it seemed like karma had finally caught up to him, and he started losing more and more clients due to his unethical practices. The fine came to him when he had no clients that month, so it was a very obvious dent in his bank account. Ultimately, it was not a huge amount, but knowing Eugene's stinginess and ego, I think the damage was enough to qualify as revenge. 3. I'm a 24-year-old man living in the South. I used to work for a construction company that was extremely into micromanaging and breathing down your back at every opportunity. I worked there for almost 7 years before getting my CDL and leaving for better opportunities. I am currently about a month into my new job delivering lumber and cabinet parts around the area I live in. It's been really nice work so far because nobody is breathing down my back, and as long as the work that I am assigned to gets done, nobody has any complaints. When I first started this job, I knew it was going to be kind of labor-intensive due to the heavy things that I haul around. So when I went on my first solo run, I talked to my dispatcher to make absolutely certain what my responsibilities were in regards to removing the cargo from the truck. I was told that it is my responsibility to get the cargo to the edge of the truck where the customer will be able to unload it. I can help as much as I feel like helping, and will still be covered by company insurance policies, and the whole bodily harm type stuff that comes with that kind of work, but I am not obligated to unload at all unless I feel like it. Here is where my malicious compliance comes in. It started last week when I was dropping off a large pack of lumber in a small industrial park. I walk into the customer's shop, introduced myself as the driver for the company, and told him I had to unload for him. He immediately began telling me that the plyboard goes here and the other larger skinnier board, slight 2x4s and 2x6s, go next door in this little shop area that he had set up specifically for storing his lumber. I politely asked if he had a forklift because the pack of lumber I was delivering was about 30 sheets of plywood, which is pretty labor-intensive to unload. He looked at me funny and then laughed at me dismissively, telling me that no, of course he doesn't have a forklift. Thankfully, one of the other people that operates out of this particular industrial complex was out and about on their forklift, and I politely asked him for his help in unloading this customer's lumber, to which he agreed, and we got it all stacked up. He signed the paperwork, and I laughed, not really thinking anything about it, other than how rude the man was. Fast forward to today, and the rude man is my second stop. He has ordered a fair amount of plywood as well as about 15 or 20 1x6s that are all very rough cut, meaning they have splinters and everything just sticking off of them so he can sand it down to his liking. I walk in his shop, tell him where I'm from and who I work for, and he begins telling me where all of his lumber is going to be placed. I immediately had my suspicions confirmed from the last time that he expects me to unload approximately 1,000 pounds of lumber by myself, as well as place it wherever he wants for him. I decided to take a little walk around the industrial complex to see if I can find the guy with the forklift, and fortunately I do. This wonderful man helps me to unload all of this lumber and set it where the customer designates. The customer then asks me if I have snips to cut the metal bands binding the packs together. I tell him I do not, so he grabs a pair from his shelf and cuts the band off. He then apologizes to the man that owns the forklift and tells him we shouldn't be needing him anymore, and then looks to me and says, "Okay, you know where it all goes." Now I am perfectly fine with helping people unload if need be, especially if they are being nice to me. All this man has done is laugh derisively and demand things from me in the 20 minutes that I have ever been in his presence. I tell him, "Sir, I hate to be the one to have to tell you this, but it is not my responsibility to sort your lumber, nor is it my responsibility to unload it." The man gives me a confused yet angry look, like somebody that has a dog turd fired at them out of a slingshot, and they haven't realized it's going to get them square in the face. He immediately turns hostile and tells me that I am the only driver that has ever refused to help him, and he will now be getting his deliveries on Wednesday instead of Friday. He then angrily writes me a check and hands it over to me without even attempting to look me in the eyes. I asked him to let me clarify and then tell him that I have no problem helping people unload, but I will not unload such a large load by myself. He shoves the check into my hand and tells me, "Whatever, just go." I imagine I will be hearing about this later on after I get back to my shop. But honestly, I cannot wait for Wednesday, just to see the look on the man's face when he realizes that he's stuck with me, and to his horror he may have to unload his lumber by himself for the first time in 20 years. I did talk to my supervisor at the shop, and he says he's absolutely on my side, so I'm not worried in the slightest. 4. I never thought that a story like this would happen to me, but I have been gifted. Main persons involved: Jane the liar and cheat, me, my friend John, Justice Simp, These will make sense later. Justice Hero, Justice Beast. Other persons involved will be introduced as needed. Details have been left vague, obviously to protect the parties involved. I don't mind revealing more details if asked. Let's begin this back in October 2018. I am a sophomore in university, and I have joined some student clubs. At this time, I wasn't too active in the club that is the subject of this story, but in October 2018, the president at the time, who we will call John, since they're a close friend of mine now, was working on a project on campus. This project was to accommodate certain individuals on campus by allowing them to park in staff lots. On our campus, parking in the normal lots for these individuals could mean a 10 to 15 minute walk with their temporary impairment. So, parking in staff lots made a whole lot of difference. After months of being tossed around by different departments, John ultimately got the approval by going to the university president directly. In total, John had worked on this project for a little over a year. I was later elected in spring 2019 as the club historian, and then the president in fall 2019. For a year and a half, things were going good. Our club asked about how well the project was doing since its initial start, and dozens of students with the particular impairment had been using it. We were incredibly proud to have made a difference on campus. John was especially proud, since it was basically their baby that they conceived for the campus. There was even a university and nationwide article published about it for our club. Introducing Jane. Jane was a classmate of mine who was in political science and had aspirations for public office where we live. They had been in some of my classes and was a well-known student senator on campus. Jane was pretty well known for being liked and popular. However, with those who have worked with Jane, like my friend John, Jane was infamous for being manipulative and a flake on things that didn't benefit their own interest. Lo and behold, this semester, yes, this spring, Jane did something remarkable. Jane took credit for John's work. You see, our university newspaper publishes the biographies of each candidate running for student offices. Jane was running for president. You may think, why is this such a big deal? It's just a student popularity contest. Yes and no. Yes to it being a popularity contest, but no because the students in office at our university control hundreds of thousands of dollars. The last reported number I saw was around 1 to 2 million in a fully student office-controlled budget. If Jane was elected, Jane would have real power. Anyways, Jane had taken credit for John's work. Again, John had slaved for over a year to get the program in place at our university, and Jane just grabs the credit for it, saying that they created the program. In addition, Jane was a nominal member of the club, having only attended a handful of meetings, and never attending events except in passing. John confronted Jane about it, to which Jane promised to change their bio. I bet she wishes she did now. After a few days of no change, John emails the editor of the university paper and asks if they can change Jane's bio, while also giving due credit to John and the clubs affiliated with the actual work. The editor informed us that because Jane was not requesting the change themselves, the most that the paper would do was place a note at the bottom of the bio saying what Jane said was false. This wasn't good enough. By now, the paper had been out for 2 weeks, and no one checks the online sources by now. John confronted Jane again, now demanding that Jane not only change their bio, but also publicly apologize and give credit to our club. Jane again promised, and we waited for another week, giving her ample time to make the change. By then, it was already election week. This was the very first week of corona lockdown for our city. On the election ballot, Jane's bio had changed to say that she had initiated, not created, the program. She changed one word. One word. John and I were furious. We had to do something. But who would take this seriously? The student elected officials were all in group, and there's no way we can get this by without some hard evidence. Then there was me. I spent a few days compiling text messages between John and Jane, emails by John from October 2018 to late 2019 to university departments, emails from John to the editor, and news articles officially giving credit to John and our club. Obviously, Jane was nowhere to be found in the email chains. Not even the meeting minutes for the University Senate had any record of Jane proposing the program to the Student Senate. We had her dead to rights, on flat-out lying and stealing credit for work that she didn't do. Unfortunately, I did not get the evidence compiled before the end of student elections. Jane was elected as the Associated Student President. But wait, something glorious happened. A day or two before I submit my findings to the Student Senate, a post on the university Facebook catches my attention. It couldn't have been more beautiful. Right there was a screenshot of Jane DMing someone on Instagram, saying that if they vote for them, that they'd be enrolled into a gift card raffle. Borderline bribery and incitement? You're darn right. In a matter of hours, the post went viral on campus. Hundreds of students demanded an explanation. With no official comment by the Student Senate, campus administration, or external student affairs. The silence riles up the student plebs even more. To add salt to the wound, a particular student senator defended Jane, saying, "It was approved, get over it." Little did we know this person would be very important later. After about 2 days of no actions, I finally have all I need. The emails, the texts, the bio screenshots, Jane's promises to change the info, and Jane's DMs to people bribing them to vote. My case file was complete. I even managed to have John give me an official statement on the issue, which was approved by the national headquarters of our club. I PM'd the Associated Students' office on Facebook, and I emailed their office manager, and a few student senators, all my findings. I also CC'd the chair of student affairs to make sure that they read my email, because whenever you CC the upper leadership, they won't be happy at seeing bad stuff said about them. A few days later, I got a response. All my findings were forwarded to the Student Court, which was the judicial committee of the Student Senate. I also had no idea we had one, but apparently they have a good deal of power. Enough people were emailing complaints to the office that official cases were being brought up against Jane, 2 by Jane's opponents in the election, and the other by me. Within the week, I was invited to make my case against Jane. Trial day. Now, the rules of the Student Court are rather laxed. If you've ever been part of a mock trial, it was a lot like that, but with less formal rules on what you're allowed to present to the court. To add to this, due to Corona, we had to have the court session over Zoom. This setup is a whole other story involving explicit imagery from a troll. In the stupidity of it all, Jane had refused to show up to the online meeting, but was giving rebuttals via email. Before me, one of Jane's opponents went against her. For the sake of simplicity, I will summarize both of the cases against Jane by her opponents. Basically, they argue that what Jane did was unethical, even though no specific campus policy went against bribery, literally. They still argue that it was unethical and that the court should both recommend that the Senate amend the policy and punish Jane, including Justice Simp. Remember that student senator who defended Jane on Facebook and told us to get over it? Guess who one of the justices on the student court was? That's damn right, Justice Simp. Conflict of interest? Yeah, definitely. For a solid 15 minutes, Simp was arguing with the other justices on whether or not to recuse himself. However, due to a lack of solid evidence detailing the relationship between Jane and Justice Simp, he was allowed to sit on the court. Now, before each election, every student candidate is required to sign off on a form stating that they understand the rules, that they are accountable to all rules and regulations, even if they do not get elected. For all intents and purposes, the candidates are members of the University Senate policies. This is important because Simp tried to argue a technicality. The Student Senate rules are specifically worded to include only active student senators and members and faculty. Justice Simp argued that because Jane was bribing students, but not as a president or senator, that the rules did not apply to her. He literally said this. Justice Hero wasn't having any of it. This entire time, Justice Hero and Simp were going at it, with Simp oddly defending Jane to the death, while Hero was just trying to get to the facts of right and wrong. When Simp's argument for the technicality failed, he literally argued, "How could Jane possibly know about the rules?" In comes Justice Beast, another justice on the court who isn't having any of Simp's crap. Beast comes in strongly reading verbatim the statement on the form that Jane signed when beginning their campaign, saying that they promised to comply with all university rules and regulations. Goodbye, vague loophole, you've been closed. When the court voted on whether or not Jane was guilty of bribing other students, the total was 4-1, with Justice Simp being that one guy who refused to accept the facts. Now, my case was a little different. Where the other cases were about Jane bribing other students to vote for them, my case was about Jane breaking the policies of honesty and integrity. The Student Officials Code of Ethics literally has a section about honesty, and a section about fulfilling obligations that you promise and not taking credit for work you didn't do. All the justices were forwarded my case's evidence, and it was my time to make my case against Jane. I presented all the evidence I mentioned before, elaborating to say that no one does anything like this unless you intentionally lie, including the literal change of one word. My nail in the coffin was the official statement by John, which detailed the entire ordeal in a nicely approved letter by national leadership. Upon being questioned, Justice Simp tried to trip me up, asking how I knew Jane was active or not in the club. Me, having a few years of mock trial experience, declared that it would be hearsay for me to answer, as I wasn't an active member or officer during the time that Justice Simp was asking about. In order to get an answer, he'd have to ask John, who was the president at the time. However, I did add that in the times that I was an officer, I only saw Jane 2 or 3 times over the last year and a half. Nowhere near the levels of activity that Jane was claiming. Nice try, Simp, but your crap isn't going to work with me. Again, Justice Simp is stalling, trying to keep the court from voting on the issue. It's getting late in the night, and we all want to leave. I am almost certain Jane was watching from a friend's screen while also messaging Justice Simp. During the deliberation, Jane emailed the justices her response, basically saying how the rules don't apply to her because she wasn't acting in the office of a student official. Justice Simp read Jane's response verbatim and still defended her. Justice Beast and Justice Hero had enough of Simp's crap, and called for a vote on the case. My case, being much more well-documented and based on concrete university policies, held up ridiculously well, especially when Hero and Beast brought up the ethics code about only taking credit for what you did. Simp shut up really quick. The end vote, 5-0. Even Justice Simp couldn't deny that Jane had flat-out lied and stolen credit. I celebrated that weekend by buying some beers and enjoying myself, social distancing style. We are still awaiting the official punishment of Jane, but there is talk about removal from office, as well as Justice Simp being investigated for conflict of interest in the cases. I have never been more satisfied to ruin Jane's campus political career, and it likely will ruin their future political career. I plan to email the evidence to the politicians Jane has and is working with. Update. Today, the Student Council released its official decision on the case. As of today, Jane is disqualified from candidacy and student presidency, and the rules are to be amended to prevent others like her from bribing votes. I love this part. Through evidence provided by Augustinus 33, there was no documentation that showed that Jane had any part in the process of organizing the parking program. The student court is even changing the rules to allow other justices to vote out other justices, if they believe there is a conflict of interest. No one trusts Justice Simp anymore. In a weird way, Corona has made this the best experience ever for me. 5. I am one of the unfortunate people to be a key worker during the situation in the UK, and this happened today. With it being the end of the financial year, the 5th of April in the UK, everyone was trying to do last-minute payments to their ISAs, and all day we were bombarded with customers wanting to pay money in, open accounts, etc. Now recently, due to how many people are trying to hide their money, our systems have been a little messed up due to the increased traffic to the call centers as well as the website, and today was no different other than the fact that it's a weekend, which is 1, outside of banking hours, and 2, a day when the majority of our staff are off. Not to mention the fact that we've cut down our departments a lot because of the situation, and we're getting so far behind that it's looking like it's going to take months, maybe even a year, to be able to get up to speed with everything once this is over. So if anyone has worked in the financial sector before and know anything about ISAs, you'll know that the government requires all banks and financial institutions to send out what's called a gap letter to make sure that you've not invested in more than one ISA in the tax year. This is important for later. So all day I've had people deal with complaining that the website won't let them invest in their accounts. And I've had to say basically, I would suggest next time that you invest earlier in the year. But one guy immediately came through and just started hurling abuse at me. Now, in my workplace, I'm known for not really taking abuse from customers unless it's something that we have caused. He's complaining that he can't invest into his ISA because it's telling him he's not allowed and he can only invest a certain amount. I ask the standard, have you already invested with us in this financial year? To which he dances around the question and continues berating me about how he knows the rules. And I ask to lock him into his account to see what's going on. To which, surprise, surprise, he has an issue with telling me instead of questioning him, I should have been working out the issue from the beginning, demanding to speak to a manager, calling me an idiot, and expecting me to know all of his personal details from the one name he gave me at the beginning. On a side note, the amount of people who call up certain places and don't give an account number and expect us to have all the information including your fucking blood type is just ridiculous. The next thing he says is I'm trying to explain that I don't have his information.
I want to raise a complaint.
Cue the malicious compliance. At this point, I've just about given up trying to help him, and I say, okay, I'll just need all your details to raise this, so he gives them. And I offer to still have a look into the issue while making the complaint, which causes another tirade of insults spewing from him about how I need to
hurry the fuck up. The deadline is midnight.
So I carry on making the complaint and tell him, I've raised a complaint for you, sir, and one of our complaint handlers will be in touch with you in the next 3 days. But due to the current situation, we're stretched a little thin, so it will take us a little while longer to contact you. I hope your day is as pleasant as you've been to me. And I hang up the phone. The reason he can't invest? Gap letters are sent from everyone with a 30-day lifespan from their first investment in that financial year. Guess who hadn't sent his back to us from the year before? Yep. The thing is, I could have explained this to him had he just decided to be nice and patient, instead of being rude and abusive towards me, but now he'll have to wait up to 2 weeks for someone to explain this to him. Basically, if you make a call to a call center, be nice to them, because it may just save you a lot of time and effort. Update. So the complaint handler called him on Monday, and the conversation goes as follows. Hi, this is complaint handler from financial institution. I'm contacting you because of your complaint you raised. Now
I'm busy. Call back when I'm free, not when you're free.
And hung up the phone. So the complaint handler did the thing that makes me absolutely love him for. He unallocated the complaint. Basically, it's now in a queue for it to be automatically allocated to another person, when the backlog, nearly 500 complaints made before his, have all been dealt with. Hope you enjoy the next month waiting time. 6. I was in the military until re-enlistment. I was a mechanic. Not a very good one, but I could change parts with the best of them. This happened over 20 years ago. I did clean up the language a bit, but I think you will enjoy it. Our platoon mostly had very good leaders, but we did have one douche staff sergeant who was the absolute worst. When he arrived, we already had a motor sergeant and a platoon sergeant, both of whom outranked him, so he was assigned to the job of managing our vehicle inspections. They were daily, weekly, monthly, etc. inspections that had to be performed. Not a difficult job, but one they assigned him to get him out of the offices, since he didn't have anything else to do and nobody really liked him. Every Monday, the vehicle operators from other platoons would come to the motor pool to do the weekly inspection. The mechanics were assigned a set of vehicles to cover. We would usually work the repairs that could be done immediately, like replacing lights or tightening loose bolts. Then, during the week, we would make all of the other repairs. And when we were done, typically Friday, we would sit down to order all the parts that we didn't have in supply. I was working when one of the operators placed his inspection sheet on my clipboard and left. When I looked at the paperwork, I noticed that his sheet listed a needed repair that was considered a deadline deficiency, a repair that must be performed prior to operating the vehicle per regulations. I informed the motor sergeant, and he said that particular repair wasn't critical and nobody was really certain why it was considered to be a deadline. He also said that he would notify the platoon using it and would ask them to bring it back when it was convenient. Usually, if a deadline vehicle were being operated, we would send the wrecker out to retrieve it. So I do my repairs on Tuesday and Wednesday, and the vehicle still wasn't back. My work was very light that particular week, and I was done with all the repairs by lunch on Wednesday. So I sat down to order my parts. In walks Dush Sergeant. He instantly begins berating me for being lazy. He then asks if my repairs are made. I tell him that all the ones I could make are, and he asks for the paperwork, which he flips through quickly. He notices the one truck, and the conversation goes like this.
Is this repair complete? There's nothing written here.
No, but...
No buts. Go out to the lot and fix it. I don't want you doing anything else until it's done.
Yes, Sergeant. Our motor pool has assigned spots for each vehicle. I looked through the manual for the size bolts for the particular part, grabbed the appropriate wrenches, and headed out. I laid down in the vehicle's assigned spot, raised my wrenches, and pretended to turn them. I lay there for an hour and a half wrenching air. Operators and mechanics noticed me, but didn't say anything. Several had heard the conversation and laughed a bit. The motor sergeant was walking the lot, doing his thing, when he noticed me laying there. The look on his face was priceless. He either thought that I had finally cracked, I was a bit high-strung those days, or that maybe I had heat exhaustion. So he walks over, and I could see the gears in his head spinning, and he asks, after a minute of thought, what I was doing. I told him I was making the repair to this vehicle, which only added to the confused look on his face. And then he asks, in a tone of voice reserved for the mentally impaired, if I was aware that the vehicle wasn't there. So I replied, I know this, Sergeant, and you know this, but Diaz does not want to hear any buts. He only wants me out in this lot until this repair is complete. Dush Sergeant did eventually get in trouble, just not for this. He did have several equal opportunity complaints for racism that eventually got him, but the motor sergeant knew me well. We had been deployed for a year, knew the situation, and he just laughed and told me to go back to work. He also said that I should have informed him of the situation so it could be resolved in a more productive manner. I quoted something military men have been told for a long time. Follow the last order given. I have quite a few stories with this guy. 7. Here is some backstory for you. Several years ago, my mom was dating this nice man with 2 kids. My younger brother and I liked the boyfriend himself, but his kids were another story. His kids were entitled jerks that always got what they wanted, constantly stole our toys, and were generally a nuisance to be around. I always tried to be a better person, but my brother and I were constantly getting into arguments with them due to their pettiness. They weren't even the worst part of the relationship. The boyfriend's ex-wife was. From my perspective, I felt that she was the type of person that if she couldn't have him, nobody could. She made my mother's and our lives hell, constantly filing false complaints about our side of the family, generally pointed at my brother and I. From harassment to claiming I had stolen the son's toys, which was the other way around, and after going after the boyfriend, claiming he was an unfit parent. Several times she'd try and ruin any plans we had come up with. For example, after spending months planning a trip to New York, last minute she blew a fuse and demanded we cancel the trip so that she could take her own trip with them. We had already gotten a written agreement from her. One time she even demanded the older son and I visit a family therapist. After putting all the blame on me, I told my side of the story. It resulted, without the therapist fully implying, that they agreed I was in the right and them storming out of the room. Among many other reasons, even after my mom and her boyfriend had gotten engaged, the ex-wife was one of the biggest reasons why Mom had decided to call off the engagement. The harassment and drama were just too much for us. It broke her heart to do so, but she made us the priority and got us out of that situation.
A few years after the breakup, my small family and I were living happily. I never saw the kids or the dude again. My mom still kept in touch with the former boyfriend, but after some time apart, she's seen the faults in him too. I was in the 8th grade and living life happily. That was until the ex-wife stepped into gym class one day. Apparently, since the breakup, she had gotten her teaching degree and became a substitute teacher. She was now replacing our normal gym teacher who was on maternity leave, as well as acting as the assistant teacher for our health and sex ed class. Basically, I now had to see her pretty much every other day for the rest of the school year. At first, she didn't recognize me. Puberty had hit me hard, changing my appearance drastically, especially for someone who hadn't seen me in like 5 years. Eventually, she recognized my name, and that's when the harassment began anew. All of it was snide remarks about my appearance, constantly pointing me out as an example as to what puberty can negatively do to you. Pimples, facial hair, voice cracking, that sort of stuff. To the class, as if I was the only one dealing with it. The main health teacher didn't know about it either. Basically, everyone in the 8th grade was taking sex ed at the same time. It was technically one extremely large class, but split up into male and female groups. And wasn't I lucky that the ex-wife got all the male half? Mine. I told my mom about it immediately, and she was livid. She sent multiple emails to the school requesting that they switch teachers or at least let me take the class online. It all fell on deaf ears until, with the help of the ex-boyfriend, we showed them dozens of emails, phone calls, and messages, all spouting harassment at my family and I. This resulted in her being fired from the school, and basically being blacklisted from our school district and the surrounding area. If she wanted another teaching job, she would have to find it elsewhere. This resulted in a major legal battle between her and the ex-boyfriend, because she had tried to move out of state with the kids without his nor the court's permission. Apparently, she lost custody of the kids and had to go back to her old job. Don't know what it was. All in all, it was an interesting experience. We cut all ties with that entire family after the whole ordeal and went on with our lives. I'm now a sophomore in college, waiting out the lockdown in my state, while my mom still hasn't had a long-term relationship since then, mostly sticking to online dating. One of them turned out to be a pedo, but that's a story for another day. But she's happier than she's been in a long time. Thank you for listening. 8. Whilst I was at university, I worked in our students' hall, basically a 2-story bar that was subsidized by the government. Because of the subsidy, it was the cheapest place in town. So we would get a couple locals come in. To prevent this, we were supposed to check everyone had a student ID, but no one minded as the locals were usually polite and handled their booze better than most students. My manager, who was a local himself, would encourage locals to come and would either discourage ID checks or simply not inform new staff of the situation. He would often steal from the bar and would give free drinks to his mates. One night he had a bunch of his buddies in town come in, have a drinking session at the bar's expense, paid for maybe 1 out of 5 drinks, till way past closing and beyond our license. This resulted in the police being called for a noise complaint, and his boss, Hall's head, finding out. To cover his ass, he claimed that the group were locals that we, the bar staff, had happily allowed to stay, and then fudged the accounting for the night to make up for the free drinks. Because of this, he himself demanded we check every student ID, and the head took away some of our employee perks. The Sunday after this all went down, the pool tournament guys came in. These guys rotate which bar they go to every week between a list of maybe 6 that have enough pool tables and lounge space. I personally have served them a half-dozen times. They make their way over to the bar, and the first guy is well into his 40s. "Hey man, before I can serve you, I have to see your student ID." He chuckled and said something along the lines of, "Do I look like a student?" and proceeded to order, "Look, I'm sorry, but I've been told that if you haven't got a student ID, I can't serve you." He started to realize I wasn't just messing with him and looked to the other member of staff, who reiterated the point. "Are you serious? We've been coming here for years." "Yes, sorry. Mike is cracking down on the only students rule. I can grab my supervisor if you want." My supervisor was also a student and explained the situation, He said he was sorry for the inconvenience and that if they had any complaints to call the head, my manager's boss, and he even gave out a couple of his cards that were in the office. The pool guys left, which meant no one was really in the building, so we ended up closing early. Next morning, I awoke to my manager screaming down the phone at me, but it was my day off, so I hung up and didn't go to work as a customer till past noon. When I did, my customers couldn't wait to tell me what had happened. My manager had come in and had a shouting match with my supervisor in front of everyone grabbing a morning coffee. The head had indeed received some complaints and scheduled a meeting with the manager that morning. Not wanting to face it alone, he took my supervisor with him. I imagine intending to throw him under the bus as much as possible. The head was pissed, A, because all of these 40-something men had called to complain on his personal number on a Sunday. B, because these 40-something men, by their own admission, had been coming for years at the invite of the manager whom they knew well. My manager tried to save face and claim they were associated with the university, that they were in fact lecturers. That it was the bar staff's failing to check for student ID all this time. Turned on my supervisor, saying he'd given them a bad reputation, cost them money by turning them away, and closing early, as well as laying bare every other mistake he had ever made. My supervisor explained that it was never explained to the staff that customers had to be students, as the manager actively encouraged locals to come in, that even lecturers get a form of student ID, and explained to the head about the manager's drinking with his mates and the dodgy accounting he'd do. This led to the CCTV being checked. When the head saw that it was in fact the manager and his mates, that the bar staff rarely put anything through the tills at his request, suspended him on the spot. He said that the accounts would need to be audited, and that he would likely be terminated and even prosecuted. After a surreal couple of weeks, we got our perks back. They hired a new manager, and eventually they installed locks on the doors that could only be opened with a student ID. No idea what happened to the old manager, but by no means a loss. 9. Please be aware the following video contains reference to, but not specific detail in any way, on the death of farm animals, specifically chickens and ducks. It's been 2.5 years, but I can finally post about this. This is juicy, so get ready. Background information. We live in an old and big manor that has been split into 3 attached houses. The houses are about 150 years old, and were built around 5 huge giant sequoias which were about 200 years old. In the UK, giant sequoias are very rare, and the 2 in our garden up the house price by about £60,000. We live next to 2 really nice neighbours, 1 young couple and 1 old couple. This story. Unfortunately, our old neighbours passed away, so their child and her family moved in. Let's call her Jo. Jo was instantly a pain in the ass. We had been sharing chickens with the previous neighbours, and Jo agreed to keep sharing them. However, on her nights, she would constantly forget to put them away, so we would have to check them every night anyway. One night, her little brats thought it would be funny to open our personal duck pen in the night, which leads to a mass slaughter later. The chickens went the same way. About 2 years ago, there was a storm and one of her sequoias somehow fell over and died. They were distraught, understandably. But from then on, the jealousy started. She would constantly complain about how lucky we were to have 2 sequoias in our garden, and how our sequoia was making too much shade in their garden. It wasn't. Anyway, we just thought it was Jo being a pain. There were a few dry threats like they will chop it down or maybe the next storm will blow it down. Until we came back from a holiday to France to find the huge 6-meter stump and nothing else. I mean, how the fuck do you get rid of a 100-foot tree in 2 weeks? 2 of our old British oak trees had been crushed as well. My mum and sisters crying, my dad red in the face, and we had no evidence Jo had done it. She claimed that there had been a storm and she had to get rid of it. We had a security camera at the front of the house, but you can get in the back if you go through a few fields. We then were given an £8,000 bill for damages to her property, and to have the tree chopped up and removed, the wood alone would have been worth a small fortune. We had lost all hope, and 2 weeks had passed when my dad came running from the garden. We had put up a wildlife camera a few months ago, and it had caught everything. We got a lawyer on the phone and started our revenge. We got a tree surgeon out who said it was an original specimen brought into the UK in 1860. Along with the 2 that were in Elveston Castle Country Park, there were 218 around the UK, but only 60 now. He also told us to call out an engineer because the roots might be in the foundation, so when they rotted could damage the house. Turns out, we would need to redo the foundations. Then we took Joe to court and sued them for damage to property, trespassing, and lots of other smaller claims. The tree would cost $250,000 to have another sequoia that was 200 years put in and looked after. It's basically impossible. Plus the damage to the foundations, which was £200,000, and the 2 oaks, which were another $25,000. So with the smaller claims, it went about £500,000, or $700,000. They had to move out. And we have now paid off the mortgage, done a lovely loft and kitchen conversion, and have basically done up the house and garden, as well as planted a 60-year-old sequoia tree in the back garden. We also had our kitchen counter and table made from the old sequoia. We now have a new, lovely family living next to us, who we share chickens, ducks, and pygmy goats with. They're very nice, and I make a fortune babysitting their kids. 10. I used to be a store manager at a video store. This happened about 10 years ago. I used to run numerous video and gaming stores in a popular video and gaming rental chain. It was originally a fun company to work for, as many places start out great. This, over my 7 years there, slowly started becoming pretty shady, and pretty much turned into another money-hungry place to work. My district manager, we'll call him Dick because it suits him. This is maybe the worst thing he did to me. So, I was running this particular location for about a year, and the company's safety policy of having at least 2 people on staff at all times kinda went out the window about 6 months ago, and was pretty much one person to open or close the store. So one would open, one would close. I had a good worker working for me, we'll call John. He was very dependable and reliable, and all around a good guy. That's why I found this a difficult situation. I would open, John would close. At the start and end of every shift, we had to round down every till to make sure in total it was £75. So it started. When I would come into work and run the 4 tills down, one drawer would be completely empty. I double and triple checked all the cash to see if it was put into another till or left in the safe. Ended up not finding it. So I would go and check the surveillance cameras, noticing that the cameras were shifted over away from the cash registers, as well as the tapes being rewound to honestly I don't know when. But it would record over the actual theft of the register. These tapes recorded into split screen and could only be played back in those types of recorders. I would rewind and try to find when this tape was rewound to and who did it. As to on occasion, we'd be allowed to have another closer, and a few days a week, usually the busier days, another second staff member to help close up. I could not in the time I had find where this tape was altered from, tried numerous times. I had to replace the missing money out of pocket, so I kept my eye out, didn't want to think it was John but kept an eye on him, only to notice numerous more times this same thing kept happening. I would put the cameras back in place to catch whoever it was in the act. Again, every time John closed and I opened, the cameras were moved, tapes were altered. Everything pointing to this said it had to be John. Talked to him, of course he denied it. Said all the money was there when he would close and he didn't touch any cameras. So I contacted my district manager about the situation. He said he would call me back to discuss further action as to whether or not I was going to terminate John. Because $75 at least 3 times a week out of my pocket adds up. As well as I don't want someone stealing from my store. I can't stand thieves. But I've been going through this for over a month now and was playing phone tag. Or pretty much just me repeatedly calling my boss, as we are required to have it approved through them to terminate an employee. Dick knew the whole story that was going on and would never give me the okay to fire John, would dodge my calls, while everything continued coming up missing, and pulling more money out of pocket to replace it. Well, I got fed up. I'm done doing this. And since Dick won't give me an okay or any help, I go over his head to the regional manager, who is based in another state. Fill him in on what's going on and how Dick won't allow me to do anything. 2 weeks later, Dick comes into my store early in the morning before I opened the store with another worker. He also has keys to all the locations, so they were waiting for me. Says he needs to talk to me. Tells me he needs to terminate my employment there because of the theft issue. This same issue I've been trying to talk to him about getting the okay to, what I thought would fix the problem, to no avail. So I'm being fired because he won't help. Well, a few days after I was fired, my other co-worker, who was also a good friend of mine, says the regional boss is looking for me, and she told him Dick fired me. Well, he scheduled Dick to go down to the other state where he's located in the company car he drives to discuss why I was fired. Turns out the regional manager had those tapes pulled from my store and analyzed, and finds spots where they're altered. Well, who do you think was on those tapes but Dick himself stealing from my store? The regional fires him immediately and keeps the company car there and tells him to find his own way home. That was the first smile on my face since being fired. Actually a pretty good laugh, but also felt bad for accusing John. I didn't get my job back, didn't want it. The company had gone to hell in a handbasket, and with putting all that money out of pocket and everything else that was out of pocket, and being salaried for 40-hour weeks but having to work 50 to 60-hour weeks mandatory, only to be paid for the 40, it really wasn't worth it. A month later they were all shutting down due to the red box.
Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to the Revenge is Ice Cream Archives, episode 23. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories. A busy week ahead for me in the coming week. Well, tomorrow I've got to get my COVID booster. Maybe. I woke up with a very slight cough today, but it could have just been acid reflux related, because that's a thing that happens to me sometimes. Haven't coughed since I woke up, so fingers crossed. I'll get that taken care of tomorrow. Then next week I've got someone coming to install a new piece of equipment on the outside of the house. It's a meter for the heating, so I can basically just upgrade the one that was there, because the old one does not work anymore, which is a lovely thing to happen in winter. And then I've got an appointment on Tuesday, I think it is. I'll have to double check the time, but it's early in the morning, which is not good for me, but that's the time they sent me to get set up for treatments for my psoriasis, because those of you who heard me mention before, I have very bad skin psoriasis, and it does require occasional UV treatments, so that's what we'll be doing here, hoping it works better in conjunction with some medication I'm taking as well. If not, then we're on to the serious medication after that. Can't remember the name. I think it's methotrexate, but don't quote me on that, but that's an immunosuppressant. Anyway, I'm going to stop yammering on now. I'll let you all get back to your lives, and I'll go sit on the sofa and possibly have a cup of tea. Well, I'll make the tea first, then I'll sit on the sofa. Tends to work better that way. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.